Welcome to Decode Station. I'm Sarah. Tonight, we uncover one of the most unbelievable corporate deceptions of the modern era, a company that claimed to build the future of transportation with technology that didn't actually exist.
Thanks, Sarah. This story is not just about one company. It's about how ambition, hype, and belief can blur the line between innovation and illusion.
Looking at the incredible stack of financial filings and investigative reports you sent over for this deep dive, one overarching question just kept jumping out at me. We are essentially doing a forensic examination of a corporate fairy tale, right? One that rapidly degenerated into a federal crime scene.
Yes, exactly.
Good.
We are tracking the timeline of Nikola Corporation from its really lofty founding in 2014 all the way to a devastating federal fraud conviction in 2022.
Right. And the mission for us here is to understand how this single entity convinced the global financial market that it was, the undisputed next big thing in green energy. I mean, they secured a valuation in the tens of billions, and they did it entirely without a functional product.
It is absolutely staggering when you look at the numbers. But to comprehend how an illusion of that magnitude is maintained under the intense scrutiny of modern capitalism, we first have to understand the irresistible nature of their initial promise.
Yeah, that initial promise is key. Back in 2014, the founder established this company with a stated mission that felt perfectly calibrated to the anxieties of the era. The goal was to develop zero-emission commercial trucks, but powered not just by heavy batteries, but by hydrogen fuel cells.
Right, and by doing that, they position themselves instantly as the direct, heavy-duty competitor to Tesla. They were going to conquer the commercial freight space.
But reading through these early press releases in the sources, this foundation feels entirely like a mirage in a desert. How does a company achieve instant industry legitimacy simply by pointing to the horizon and claiming to be the savior of trucking long before a single vehicle ever hits the asphalt?
Well, that mirage effect is entirely driven by the profound desperation of the market at that specific time. You really have to consider the unforgiving physical realities of the commercial transportation industry. Heavy-duty trucking is the absolute backbone of global logistics.
It moves the vast majority of our goods, right? But it is also one of the most notoriously difficult sectors to decarbonize.
Exactly. And that is because the physics of traditional battery electric vehicles fight aggressively against the economics of freight. Batteries are just exceptionally heavy. In the trucking industry, every single pound of battery you add to a vehicle is a pound of profitable freight you are legally forced to remove to stay under highway weight limits.
Wow, I never actually thought about the legal weight limit aspect. That completely destroys the profit margins for shipping companies.
It really does. And furthermore, the charging times for massive battery packs would just completely decimate tight delivery schedules. So the concept of a hydrogen fuel cell truck represented the ultimate engineering holy grail.
Because hydrogen fuel cells generate electricity through an onboard chemical reaction between hydrogen gas and oxygen, right? And they emit absolutely nothing but water vapor.
That is correct. They refuel in minutes, just like traditional diesel, and the tanks weigh a fraction of what a massive lithium-ion battery pack weighs. So when a founder arrives on the scene and confidently declares that they have independently solved this massive multi-billion-dollar bottleneck, well, the market is practically begging to believe them.
I guess investors were not merely buying shares in a prospective vehicle manufacturer at that point. They were buying into the heroic narrative of saving the planet while simultaneously monopolizing a totally untapped sector of the green economy.
Exactly. But a dream of that magnitude burns through extraordinary amounts of cash. They could not just rely on private venture capital, definitely. They needed billions of dollars to build out the infrastructure they were promising.
Right, because the bold claims escalated so rapidly, they were no longer just promising a revolutionary truck. They were promising proprietary advanced hydrogen technology and a completely unprecedented nationwide network of zero-emission fueling stations.
And let's not forget the massive partnerships they announced with established legacy automotive corporations. To finance this aggressively escalating narrative, they desperately needed a backdoor into the public markets.
Which leads us to June 2020. They utilized a specific financial vehicle to go public via a special purpose acquisition company, or, what is commonly known as a SPAC. And this merger resulted in a dizzying market valuation that rapidly exceeded $30 billion.
It was absolutely unprecedented. At one specific point in the trading frenzy, this zero-revenue startup was deemed more valuable by the stock market than Ford Motor Company.
Which is just wild to think about. This valuation feels completely detached from the laws of financial gravity. Looking at the numbers in the source material, it is the equivalent of valuing a rough sketch on a cocktail napkin more highly than a century-old skyscraper. I was looking at the S1 filings, and it seems like SPACs essentially allowed them to bypass all normal scrutiny.
That comparison to a sketch on a napkin is actually a highly accurate reflection of the regulatory environment surrounding SPACs at that time. Think of a traditional initial public offering, or IPO, like getting a full federal background check before you're even allowed to buy a house.
Right, a traditional company has to open their books to forensic audits, historical performance reviews, and just intense skeptical scrutiny from investment banks.
Exactly. A SPAC fundamentally bypasses much of that friction. A SPAC is essentially a blank check shell company that is already publicly traded on the stock exchange. It raises capital from investors with the single sole purpose of finding a private company to merge with.
So, when that merger occurs, the private company essentially swallows the shell and inherits the public listing. It is like finding a house that is already approved, buying the corporate entity that owns it, and moving in the next day without ever submitting to a formal inspection.
That is a perfect way to describe it. And crucially, during the massive SPAC boom of 2020, a specific regulatory loophole allowed companies going public via this route to make highly speculative, aggressive financial projections about their future earnings.
Oh, so they were legally permitted to sell a hypothetical future in a way that traditional IPOs were strictly forbidden from doing?
Yes, they were legally allowed to project revenue years into the future based on technology they hadn't even finished building yet.
Combine that structural loophole with a 2020 market environment flooded with pandemic-era capital and retail investors desperate to find the next generational wealth builder, and you get a perfect storm of irrational exuberance.
The market was definitely not valuing the company based on current assets or tangible intellectual property. They were taking decades of hypothetical future perfection, assuming execution would be absolutely flawless, and pricing it into the stock as a current certainty.
But that staggering $30 billion valuation created a really dangerous new dynamic. The market eventually demands tangible proof of this revolutionary technology. And the intense pressure for physical evidence leads us directly to the most infamous moment in this entire investigative timeline.
Yes, the promotional video. The company released a video showing one of their prototype trucks seemingly cruising at high speed down a desert highway.
Right, and it was presented to the world as this massive triumph of modern engineering. But the factual reality, which was uncovered much later, was that the truck had absolutely no power or propulsion system whatsoever.
None at all. It was an empty shell that had been towed to the top of a low-grade 2-mile incline, and they simply rolled it down a hill to simulate forward motion.
And they deliberately tilted the camera during production to obscure the slope of the road. I mean, rolling a truck down a hill and filming it is not just a marketing lie. It feels like a profound insult to the fundamental discipline of engineering.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the pervasive culture in technology that encourages this specific type of behavior.
Right. I want to dissect that for a moment. At
Mhm.
what exact point does aggressive, optimistic marketing definitively cross the line into physical, fraudulent staging?
Well, that definitive boundary is crossed the exact moment you misrepresent the fundamental laws of physics to your investors in order to sustain a financial valuation. You are touching on the fake it till you make it philosophy, which was, deeply ingrained and widely celebrated in Silicon Valley software development.
Oh, sure. In the software industry, if you have a vision for a revolutionary application, you can easily create a superficial digital mock-up. You show venture capitalists a non-functional rendering, secure the funding based on the concept, and then just hire the programmers to actually build the complex back-end code later.
Exactly. And if there is a catastrophic bug upon release, you simply send out a software patch overnight. But that methodology fundamentally and dangerously breaks down when applied to heavy industrial hardware.
You cannot issue an over-the-air software patch for a complex hydrogen fuel cell propulsion system that simply does not exist in the physical world.
Precisely. The company took that permissive software mentality and applied it to a 30,000-pound commercial vehicle. The promotional video was specifically designed to provide empirical visual evidence of a proprietary propulsion system operating successfully in reality.
But by utilizing gravity instead of engineering, they crossed the line from corporate optimism into deliberate theatrical deception. They desperately needed the visual proof to sustain the massive stock price. And because the engineering laboratory could not produce the results in time, the marketing department was tasked with manufacturing them.
And the physical gravity that rolled that truck down the hill eventually gave way to the brutal financial gravity of a forensic audit. In September 2020, the illusion fractured completely, and it happened with breathtaking speed.
Yeah, the timeline here is wild. A financial research firm named Hindenburg Research published an explosive and incredibly detailed report. They called the company an intricate fraud built on dozens of lies.
The report systematically dismantled the entire corporate narrative. It stated that the core technology was not functional, that the founders' statements regarding proprietary components were deliberately misleading, and that the key revolutionary products simply did not exist in any working form.
They even tracked down the exact stretch of highway from the video and calculated the angle of the incline. And this revelation obviously triggered a massive, immediate sell-off in the stock. What fascinates me deeply about the sources is that specific phrase, intricate fraud.
It is a very deliberate choice of words.
Right, because think about the massive ecosystem surrounding a company valued at $30 billion. You have elite institutional investors, legacy corporate partners, and regulatory bodies. How does a single short-selling research firm uncover a deception of this magnitude that thousands of supposed financial experts and due diligence teams seemingly missed or, actively chose to ignore?
The answer to that question lies in the deeply flawed incentive structures of modern financial markets. Institutional investors, investment banks, and corporate partners all benefit immensely when a stock price goes up.
So during a massive bull market run, there is immense professional pressure to participate in the momentum.
Exactly. If a mutual fund manager ignores a highly visible stock that is up 400%, they risk significantly underperforming the market and losing their clients to a competitor. This creates a powerful, dangerous echo chamber where fundamental due diligence is often treated as an inconvenient roadblock rather than a necessary safeguard.
People stop asking difficult, probing questions because the potential answers might ruin the profitability of the current moment.
Right. But Hindenburg Research operates with the exact opposite incentive structure. They are short sellers. Short sellers borrow shares of a stock and sell them on the open market, hoping to buy them back later at a much lower price to pocket the difference.
Therefore, their entire business model relies on acting as the immune system of the market. They only make a profit if they find a financially sick or deceptive company and expose it to the light.
That financial incentive drives them to deploy forensic accountants, track down disgruntled former employees, and scrutinize every single public statement. Uncovering the truth is not a side project for them. It is their core mechanism for survival.
So the institutional investors did not necessarily lack the intelligence or resources to find the fraud. They simply lacked the financial motivation to look for it. But once the truth was exposed by that immune response, the unwinding of the valuation was incredibly violent.
It was immediate. The collapse of the stock price wiped out billions of dollars in investor wealth almost overnight. The fallout transformed the situation from a corporate embarrassment into a severe federal crisis.
Right. Federal authorities intervened rapidly. Formal investigations were launched by both the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. This collapse behaves exactly like a traditional bank run, but instead of being fueled by a lack of capital, it was fueled entirely by broken trust.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Trust is the only currency that actually matters in these valuations.
It really demonstrates the terrifying speed at which a $30 billion narrative can evaporate the very second the market realizes the foundational technology is completely absent. The moment the curtain is pulled back, the entire valuation mechanism goes into freefall.
Because a market capitalization of $30 billion is ultimately just a collective hallucination agreed upon by millions of people participating in the market. When a foundational pillar of that agreement is abruptly removed, the collapse is mathematically exponential.
Right. When retail and institutional investors realized that the high-speed, revolutionary truck in the promotional video was just a rolling piece of metal governed by gravity, every single other claim made by the company was instantly reevaluated under a lens of extreme suspicion.
If they lied about the truck driving itself, did they also lie about the cost of hydrogen production? Did they lie about their battery technology?
And the involvement of the SEC and the DOJ signals the definitive transition from a simple market correction to a formal criminal inquiry. The SEC investigates civil violations of market rules, ensuring that the marketplace remains fair.
But the DOJ builds stringent criminal cases based on deliberate orchestrated fraud. The sheer speed of the collapse is a direct reflection of the severity of the deception. The market aggressively repriced the company from a revolutionary pioneer to a potential crime scene in a matter of days.
And the total collapse of the stock inevitably mandated the collapse of the architect behind the illusion. We have to track the severe personal consequences for the founder. Immediately following the devastating allegations in September 2020, Trevor Milton resigned as executive chairman.
But the story obviously does not end with his quiet departure. In 2022, he faced a federal jury and was officially convicted of fraud.
The conviction was based specifically on his persistent actions of misleading retail investors about the company's technology, its operational capabilities, and its financial prospects. Interestingly, looking at the recent data and the sources, the company itself continues to operate today.
Yes, they are attempting to salvage their business model, pivot their strategy, and actually build commercial trucks, albeit with a severely damaged reputation and a fractured stock price.
This creates a fascinating legal and ethical division between the actions of the founder and the survival of the corporate entity. I really want to press you on the specific legal threshold here. I mean, the entire business world is full of visionary leaders who paint wildly optimistic pictures of the future to secure funding.
That is very true. It happens every day.
So where exactly is the razor-thin legal boundary between a charismatic chief executive passionately selling a dream of tomorrow and a convicted executive committing federal securities fraud today?
That boundary hinges entirely on the legal concept of the material misstatement of present facts. The law absolutely allows a chief executive to be highly optimistic about the future direction of their company.
So you are legally permitted to stand on a stage and declare that your engineering team will develop the greatest zero-emission propulsion system in the world within the next 5 years.
Yes, that is categorized as forward-looking optimism. And investors accept the inherent financial risk that your team might ultimately fail to deliver on that ambitious timeline. The definitive legal boundary is crossed when you make a concrete, verifiable statement about a technology that supposedly exists in the present moment, knowing full well that it does not.
Ah, I see. If you publicly state to your investors that you currently possess a fully functional prototype that is driving under its own proprietary propulsion system, and you privately know it is actually an empty shell rolling down a hill, you have committed undeniable fraud.
Exactly. You have lied about a material fact that alters an investor's understanding of the company's current value. The federal jury in 2022 determined through the evidence that the founder was not merely projecting a hopeful future, he was actively and deliberately fabricating the present reality in order to inflate and sustain the stock price.
And the legal system purposefully isolates the architect of the deception from the corporate entity itself. The company can survive the fallout, reorganize its leadership, and attempt to build actual physical products. But the individual who knowingly manipulated the public markets must face the penal system.
Precisely. Which brings us to the deeper macro analysis of this entire phenomenon. The timeline of this specific founder is closed, the conviction is secured, and the company is struggling to rebuild.
But the broader environment that allowed him to thrive so spectacularly remains entirely intact in the financial markets today. When we analyze the complex investor psychology that fueled the entire SPAC bubble, we see a stark, alarming contrast between the intoxicating power of a grand narrative and the slow, dull, grinding reality of actual technological development.
Reviewing this deep dive really forces you to reflect on your own personal vulnerabilities to hype and charismatic storytelling.
It really does. Are financial markets actively seeking out the cold, hard truth of engineering? Or do they actually want to be lied to, provided the story is entertaining enough to drive the stock price up in the short term?
It is a tough question to answer honestly.
Right. Is this specific case an isolated anomaly of one bad actor? Or is it simply the most visible, spectacular symptom of a broader market obsession with storytelling over actual substance?
I would argue it is absolutely a symptom of a much larger systemic vulnerability embedded deeply in human psychology. As a species, we are neurologically wired to respond to compelling narratives, not to complex spreadsheets or tedious engineering schematics.
I mean, when a charismatic, confident figure stands on a global stage and tells a cohesive story about saving the environment, creating thousands of advanced manufacturing jobs, and making early investors incredibly wealthy all at the exact same time, we desperately want to believe it.
Because it directly triggers our inherent human desire for visionary heroes and silver bullet solutions to incredibly complex global problems. The actual dull reality of technological development involves years of frustrating laboratory failures, complex supply chain bottlenecks, and microscopic incremental progress.
And the financial market often finds that reality entirely uninvestable because it is, well, it's boring and it is slow.
Exactly. During periods of massive financial liquidity, exactly like the environment we saw during the 2020 pandemic lockdowns, the market actively and aggressively rewards the best storyteller.
Retail investors, fueled by stimulus checks and trading apps, suspended their critical faculties because the intense fear of missing out on the next massive technological revolution completely overrode their basic common sense.
And until the market fundamentally shifts its reward structure to prioritize verifiable engineering milestones over theatrical marketing presentations, we will inevitably continue to see variations of this exact deception play out again and again across different sectors.
If a company can reach a $30 billion valuation just by rolling an empty shell down a hill, how many other seemingly revolutionary companies in your own investment portfolios might be running on nothing but gravity and a good script? Stay curious, stay skeptical. Goodbye.